Hi, Julian here from beautiful Canggu, Bali at EX Speaker Series. And we're talking to Remy de Tonac, and he's not in London as we expected. He is in beautiful south of France. Remy, thank you so much for coming on the program. How are you? How is life in southern France?
Well, not too bad. It is 29 degree today, and I will have a tennis game later in the afternoon, so cannot complain.
So this is hopefully the new normal for a lot of us. I talk a lot about this program, but we call us digital nomads, but we're not really nomadic. We don't go and travel a lot. We actually just find one beautiful place and then try to stay from there. Is that what you're going to be doing in southern France as well, or are you going back to London when the craziness is over?
Well, I will go back to London when the craziness is over, but I think it will last until probably September. And as you know, travel to the UK is not easy. Well, in the meantime, I'll be flying to Berlin, Antwerp, Helsinki, so I'm not stopping the activity as and when borders are reopening. But yeah, the new headquarters of Remy de Tonac will be south of France.
Oh, that is absolutely terrible, and I feel very, very sorry for you. Tell us about Etf Partners. I know you have been there for a long time, driving sustainability. What is ETF, and what do you guys do?
Yeah, long time, as you say. I was not one of the founders. I joined them only 4 years ago, but it was started in 2006, in the very early days when Al Gore was waking up our consciousness on the fact that the world was going into the wall with this inconvenient truth. And so the three founders of Etf Partners thought that the overall theme of sustainability, which was to be the biggest problem that the world was facing, has been ever facing, in fact, as often the problem is the solution. And innovation is the answer. And therefore, there would be lots of technology breakthrough, innovative solution that would help address the problem of sustainability. That was the founding mission of Etf Partners. And we are probably one of the oldest fund on this theme of sustainability. It is still the same today. I would only add that we are not a philanthropic organization, of course. Our first motto is sustainability through innovation. And the second one that follows immediately is profit from purpose, but profit.
No, I really, really love that concept. And, we started our first race at Agnion back then in 2006. Race actually from Kleiner Perks with Al Gore back then. And that was a time where there were a lot of clean tech funds that came up, and a lot of VC funds, also West Coast, US, Silicon Valley, thought that clean technology was going to be the big next internet. And if now we look back, I mean, we have been doing this for a while, right? Not many of these institutional investors are still around. And what makes ETF so much more successful than so many of these funds that simply, just burned their money for the last 15 years, to be quite honest, right?
Yeah, no, you are very right. I think that probably over 90% of the funds that were created in those days of post-2006, when it was very trendy and fashionable to be doing sustainability, over 90% have disappeared. They gave back the money and say, no, this is not a field for venture capital. Of course, it was not helped by the big Lehman Brothers financial meltdown, but it is not only the financial meltdown that created that. Many people did the same thing. Many people did follow the same trend. And what I think, I can say that all the more easily as I was not there, so I'm not going to brag for myself. What separated Etf Partners from many others is that the founders of Etf Partners had been in venture capital for the last 20 years. Therefore, they had a huge experience of what were the fundamentals of venture capital. And they avoided the easy trap, the Me Too companies. I'm not saying that it was easy, but it was good enough that they were able to raise fund too. and Fund 2 is still in progress, but very promising. And Fund 3 is well advanced and very promising as well. Don't know if we have time to talk about that, but we are pretty thrilled about the kind of companies in which we have invested and the way they are going to help solve major sustainability issues for the planet.
Fantastic. To sum it up, but you guys are real, sustainability driven venture capital fund, right? You don't see yourself primarily as an impact investor. You're really primarily in venture capital fund that invests into what kind of stage of what kind of companies currently?
Yeah, I'll come to that, but yeah, you said it exactly correctly. Again, sustainability is the biggest problem that we have been ever facing, which means that this is where we need the biggest solutions, the biggest innovation. And to tell you the thing, I'm challenging, each time I'm talking, I'm challenging people in the attendance to find a single sustainability issue that the world is facing that we cannot solve through innovation. And no one has been able to find any. I'm not saying that it is cheap, or I'm not saying that it is easy, but if there is a will, if there is really a strong determination to address a given issue, whether it is a one-time use plastic, whether it is the CO2 emission due to fossil fuel, circular economy, we have the solution. We have the innovation that allows to address. So then there are other things like political will and money. Back to your question, and which is why we are so excited about it, because there are so many innovation to produce and to promote in order to solve these issues, and therefore there will be so many profitable business model that we can sponsor and support. Back to your question, ETF, the latest fund is a 200 million euro fund. I would say the right side, not too big, not too small. We are Series B growth investor, so we put ticket of 5 to 15 million euro into companies that have already 2 to 3 million euro of revenue, already customers, a well-defined product, and we help them grow. We help them scale, go international, put more professional processes in place, bring in new talent. That's our position.
You also work as a lead investor, right? If I understand correctly from your past. You're not waiting for somebody else to jump on board. You go and take others with you, preferably.
Exactly. We are always lead or co-lead, and we always we want to have around 20% equity, and we don't have less than 10%.
Yeah, very exciting. So if we look at the different technologies, and I 100% agree, there's every technology already out there today to solve every sustainability problem on the planet. It is about getting it to market faster, make more impact, and stop wasting our time along the way with more capital, better staff, better projects. What exit are you looking for generally in your companies, and what is the one technology that you personally feel the most passionate about is going to make a major impact kind of after this first generation of solar and storage?
So to the first question, exit, I've been a CEO and a tech entrepreneur for the last 30 years. I did 2 IPO. So you are tempted to think that IPO is the best exit. I would say as an entrepreneur, yes, IPO is the best exit because you get a lot of visibility, a lot of adrenaline. As a VC, obviously, M&A is the best route, yeah. And it is the most natural route as well. Huh? So this is what we are looking for. But of course, when IPO do come into the picture, we will not. We'll push them, we'll promote them, but I would say probably it represents no more than 15% of the exit. Mm-hmm. To your second question, what gets me most excited when I wake up in the morning in terms of technology? I would say that if you think of the potential, I have two things in mind, but there would be too many. So I'm not saying that they are the only two for sure, but it is clear that, and it is linked to the last investment that we just made, that I just made, and that was announced yesterday, in fact. Autonomous vehicle, okay, autonomous vehicle is always 10 years ahead of us. I believe that now it is indeed 10 years of us. And if we project ourselves in 10 years in cities where there will be no more congestion, no more accidents, pure air, and we will have eliminated what represents about today 20% of the CO2 emission. Road transportation is 20% of the global CO2 emission. So that's huge. When we project ourselves 10 years from now, and there will be just fleets of autonomous cars that will go smoothly into cities without noise, without pollution, we'll just think of today as if it was barbary, Middle Age. And I'm amazed by that, and I think, oh gosh, when are we going to get there? And I think it is around the corner now.
Fantastic. I mean, we live in Southeast Asia, so we have really heavy traffic problems. So we are waiting for that as well, because I mean, as you said, having millions of people, driving around, very resource-intensive vehicles for 30 minutes a day and parking the rest of the time, and all the pollution that comes with us. We're going to look back, and I'm totally with you, and said it's fine to do that for half hour on the weekend, but it's not a method of transportation. It's a massive way of wasting massive amounts of resources. Remy, I want to thank you so much. Last question. If I'm a young startup, I think after hearing you, I'm a good fit. What is the best way to reach out to you? How can I get in contact with you, and how can I get into the process of maybe being validated for an investment by you guys?
Oh, you just call Julian. He has all my contact.
Okay, I'll take it for that. No. Join our app. But also, I know you're very active on LinkedIn. You put out content, you report, you're very outspoken about what you do. Is that a good way to reach out to you?
Absolutely, LinkedIn is a very good way, or you go on the Etf Partners website and you call for me.
Fantastic. Remy, thank you so much for your time. It was super exciting talking to you, and we'll do a catch-up call in a little bit. Definitely see you on September 3rd for EX Venture Night, and good luck with your new investment that you just done, and we'll talk very soon. Thank you so much to the south of France. Great talking to you. Bye-bye.
See.
Right back to you. Who are you? What do you do? And why do you do it? And you got 90 seconds. We do the pitch round now the other way around.
All right. Well, good. So thank you all. I'm Stephen Birkenfeld. I spent a long time, way too long, Julie knows, in investment banking. Started in 1987 at Shearson Lehman Brothers, became Lehman Brothers, then Barclays. Did many things over the years, started as a lawyer, got into transaction approval, risk management, was chief investment officer for our private equity and principal investing business. Then went through the Lehman bankruptcy, Barclays bought the business, and I started to do clean tech banking. It wasn't a private equity business at Barclays. I still ran the transaction approval process. So I saw literally thousands of companies come through. Looking at their business plans, looking at their prospectuses, all the IPOs we worked on, the private capital raises, follow-on offerings. And over all those years of seeing deals that succeed or fail, you see a lot of patterns on what makes a company successful, what makes the management team successful, and where there's going to be issues, where they're more likely to run into problems. And I would say, just as kind of one takeaway, there were very few situations that didn't go well, where the issue that came up was something that nobody expected. It was a surprise. We'll put something like the coronavirus on the side, those sort of big macro events. But in terms of the company itself specifically, those issues were always identified. We just didn't handle them the right way. We didn't assess the risk properly, cost-benefit analysis. I decided to leave in the fall from Barclays because it did more than enough time. And I actually wanted to work with earlier stage companies that didn't make sense for a large global bank. I wanted to work entirely on impact and sustainability, what in the past was called clean tech, now sometimes called climate tech, but companies that were working on, one way or the other, the climate crisis and trying to solve the problems of it. And I'm now in a position where I'm working with a bunch of really interesting companies. They've got innovative solutions to big problems. They tend to be earlier stage. It doesn't mean seed or even necessarily Series A. Some of them are more advanced than that. Some of them have bigger capital requirements and are ready to develop big projects. But they'd all be on the scheme of things, companies, way earlier than ready to go public, for instance, and certainly not created enough value that they should be looking at M&A yet. They're still in the mode of trying to raise capital and trying to scale up commercially. And I'm advising them on everything from their business plan and growth strategy to how to raise capital to who channel partners should be. Very importantly, how to communicate the story, and ultimately down the road, how they think about monetization. How's that, Julia?
That's a fantastic point. And first of all, Stephen, I'm super happy that you're joining kind of like the clean tech revolution in your post Barclay days. I mean, I know that you could have done anything, right? You could be selling nuclear submarines. I'm sure somebody would give you a job. There's like no limit to what you could be doing. And for you to just, getting involved in the impact business, we need more people like you. I talked about this earlier. We need to speak the language of capitalism, of how to make deals. We need to be professionals if we want to get something done. Because ultimately, as you said, you have a deal process when you work in investment bank, you have to follow. You can just make up your own rules. And you also have a feeling of what projects and companies will be successful going forward. Very quick summary. What, in your mind, makes a company successful? And how did you choose your deals at Barclays and personally, and where to spend your time and your money?
No, that's a challenging question, actually. And where we spend our time at Barclays or where I spend my time now isn't necessarily the companies that I think are most likely to be successful. They might be that the companies that most likely need assistance. It might be just CEOs or management teams that I feel I have a good chemistry with or rapport, and I would like to be successful. But I think if I had to break it down, and of course I gave a little thought to this beforehand, what makes a company successful? I think that first you need to have a business that is attuned to, that's based on strong macro trends. That there's a compelling investment thesis. I think that starts. What's happening in the world? Are we moving more towards plant-based foods? Okay, that is a trend that's going to be around for a while. I'd rather have that as a tailwind and not be so contrarian in my business that I'm trying to change everything, change people's behavior and their attitudes. It's easier to go along with trends that already exist. I think second, what's very important is that you have a large and growing addressable market. It's much easier to be successful as a small piece of a big market than as a big piece of a niche market. So the larger the market that you're playing in, I think the better the likelihood of success. I think you need a compelling value proposition for your customers. There needs to be a reason that they need to adopt your product. I'll call it a must-have product. If it's just incremental, it's easier to stay with incumbents in the status quo. You need to change things and make it meaningfully better for them to use your product. And I think it's very important that you somehow have a sustainable competitive advantage. What that is, that could be relationships, it could be intellectual property. But if you're onto something, you need to be able to withstand the competition, sometimes competition from much better capitalized companies. And then I would say, the financials, the capital that you need. If it's capital intensive, that makes it more challenging because you're always in the mode of raising capital. But it doesn't mean that you can't be successful. It just means that you have to really be able to communicate a very attractive return on capital proposition for those capital providers. And of course, it's management team. You know, it's interesting. A lot of people have different perspectives on this. I've asked a number of venture capitalists, would you rather have a great technology, a great market, or a great management team? And the most common answer is a great management team. And for some of them, they actually have a view that they are much less interested in investing with first-time entrepreneurs. Some of them will just say, I want to see somebody who has a track record, some success before. That's just how they view it, their criteria for investing. So I think the management team needs to be really strong too. And now what does that mean, a strong management team? I mean, it means someone who's really committed, willing to work hard, has a vision, has the skill set to make the company successful. And if they don't have that full skill set, they know to surround themselves with the right people that do. Someone who's open-minded and thoughtful and listens to good advice. And there's a lot of different things that make a strong management team. But ultimately, when I go through that whole list, I think many investors think that the top of the list, the bottom of the list, really what's critical to them is a management team that excites them, that instills confidence, and they feel they can get by.
Fantastic. I'll be charging for this MBA at the end of this class. You just heard in the last few minutes everything that, and I couldn't agree more on what it takes to make a major deal in investment banking in clean tech. Just to sum it up a few more, Stephen, this is incredible to hear this so combined. First thing you need to know is if you go out there and you raise money, you're dealing with some very smart people, right? So be careful with the bullshit you're trying to dish out to people like Stephen, because he can smell it from a mile away, to be quite honest. The second thing we discussed earlier, you know, you need to be in a growing market. You need to have your strategies aligned. You have the analytics in place. You should be tracking everything. What are your customers? All this kind of data is going to make you look like one of these people that Stephen and other investment bankers want to work with. Is that incredibly labor intensive? Yes. Does it take a lot of time to put together a great pitch deck? Yes. Does it take a lot of time to investigate? Do you have a USP, or is somebody already doing what you're doing? Are you there maybe 3 times cheaper than you? Does the market need you? It's super important. Of course it takes time to do that. And one super important thing, Stephen, and I could not agree more on this thing, is changes in clean tech should not be incremental, because we already have an existing infrastructure. So if we say we can cut off 3 to 4% of your emissions, it is not enough to people to take the risk on you and the time. So if you go out to change the world, and it's always a kind of borderline question, right? And I'm quite familiar with that, because you need to have a big vision. You need to solve fundamental problems of humanity in a growing market while making money, while not sounding like a totally crazy lunatic, right? This all needs to come together, because other than that, somebody like Stephen will have a tough time kind of betting on your horse. And that's ultimately what they do. Nobody can foresee the future. We don't know what's going to happen. But he has this checklist of what is vital to an important company coming to market, bringing the product to market, and then growing. Stephen, how do you feel?
I just want to emphasize one point you made, because I'm sure one of the questions in the audience is, how is the current environment affecting things? And one of the ways it's affecting things is the world generally has gone from start of the year where we were mostly on a risk-on mentality into now a risk-off. And that's not just in your individual behavior. It's whether you want to make an investment. It's whether you want to make an acquisition. It's also whether companies want to try out new technology. And so if it's just a modest improvement now, it's easier to just say, I'm going to keep it the way it is. I'm going to go with my incumbent. I'm going to go with the safe choice. You have to give them a compelling reason to try something new. An energy savings, a cost savings that's so significant that they can't ignore it. So I think right now, for a while, the companies that will get funded, the companies will be successful commercially, can't be incremental improvements. They've got to be really disruptive. They have to offer something that's much better than what's out there now.
Totally agree. Stephen, where do you see, without going too deep into macroeconomics, where do you see the market right now? Do you think it's easier now to raise money as a clean technology company if you have all this shit together compared to where we were 10 years ago? How is this? We remember 2006, 2008, we kind of had a little clean tech bubble. It was easier to raise some money, then it got a lot harder. Where are we now? What would you say to a young company, startup? What are the chances of getting funding if they got all the work done? Good time to do it, bad time to do it, or wait and see?
Well, I think in some ways it's better, in some ways it's worse. I mean, I wish we didn't have the pandemic, and then I think it would be much stronger. I think that is going to chill things for a while. On the other hand, there is so much focus on sustainability now. Before this call, I was just reading about the Amazon Climate Fund, $2 billion that they've committed. I've been in touch with the Microsoft Climate Fund team. Large corporations making commitments of that for billions of dollars to invest in technologies, companies that will help them go to net zero. That didn't exist 10 years ago. So there are many, many more pockets of sustainability impact investors out there. I do think there needs to be more. I do think there need to be investors that are more interested in the impact of their investments than the return. That doesn't mean return gets neglected altogether. But right now, I think many impact investors still approach investments like typical, let's say it's early stage venture capitalists. So they're still looking for really venture scalable businesses and moats around businesses and the typical things that are on a venture capital checklist. There is a need for a few more investors who will take leadership and say, I'm not giving the money away. This is a for-profit business. I expect to get some sort of return, but I'm not more concerned with the return than the impact. The impact is driving the decision. I'm willing to take a little bit more risk because this can have such an important impact on the fight against the climate crisis. So I do think it's a better time. Generally, the process is still hard, frankly, to raise capital from investors. I do think what's opening up now, and it's a special opportunity and maybe a moment in time, is that there are a lot of grants and awards, and accelerators, and incubators forming. And when you add all of that up, if you pursue them aggressively, it could be a really kind of respectable amount of capital, could really get you started to the point where you can achieve some of the commercial and financial milestones that'll make it easier to bring in investors. So one of the important pieces of advice that I deliver now is explore all of those. They're very country specific. A lot of it is around, let's use this opportunity to transition to a low carbon economy, to decarbonize, to create green jobs. But you need to be looking at everything that's available to you. Those sometimes are much less competitive, and you have much better odds of getting that money than you would getting an investment in a seed round or Series A. It won't be as much individually. When you cobble it all together, when you add it all up, it can get you pretty far into your first stages of your business plan.
Stephen, one advice I like to give after raising funds for the last decade is that if you can avoid it, or if you can delay having to go to institutional investors, if you can get your money from anywhere else through sponsorship, as you say, accelerators, government grants, revenue, pre-selling something, family and friends, whichever way, I still find the commercial funding round incredibly tedious, time-consuming, and again, also for the company, it needs to be worth it. For a seed round, for example, if you're raising 5 million, do you think it's worth it to go to a large investment bank and even talk to them, or should you pursue any other avenue of raising that money first?
Any other avenue. The investment banks are first not really good at raising private capital. They tend to have a relatively narrow list. They're actually, and I know this from being a banker and speaking to investors, there's actually a negative perception that goes with having a bank, a large bank, act as your agent, because the investors have two thoughts when that happens. One, why isn't this company good enough, well connected enough to raise the money on their own? right? So it seems to be a little bit of adverse selection in the mind, for instance, of a Silicon Valley investor. And the second is if there's a bank involved, they view it as a very level playing field, competitive process. And all investors would much rather have a proprietary opportunity, something that's shown to them, maybe to a few others, have some time to meet the company and the management team to really kind of get to know them well. Maybe if you're thinking of doing a capital raise at the end of the year, you'd start to reach out to some of those investors right now, give them information, let them watch your progress, but let them feel like they're getting something special. They're much more interested in engaging than getting a PPM from a private placement memo from a bank and saying you've got, a number of weeks to tell us if you're interested or not. That's just not how they want to operate.
My feeling also always was raising funds that there's a lot of feeling that, and there's so much hype about raising money, about the feeling that the moment you get the money, all of your problems go away. My experience having, 5 VCs on the board initially, even when I started, 4 of them from the US, was the bigger the money, the bigger the group of investors, the bigger the ego, and actually the bigger will be your problems. And unless you're really one of these businesses that kind of like can skyrocket, right? Where that investment is, say you need 50 million to bring something to market, and it's gonna jumpstart, is gonna skyrocket you to a totally different level in a very competitive market. You need the money, whatever, to buy Google ads because you can be, you can take over the whole global market in your niche. I've actually seen those deals over the years get very, very tedious because once you have these investors on board, it's impossible usually to get rid of them again. Right? It's quite easy to get divorced. Some of us have done it multiple times. It's super difficult to get rid of an investment bank that's probably going to have a board seat on your company board for a long time, and then you have to deal with all of them. So just my feeling is always avoid it as long as possible and kind of scrape together all these other funding sources that you might be able to find. Stephen, what are you excited about right now?
Also, to follow up on that point, Julian, there's 2 sides of the coin. One is how much money you raise, and the other is how much money you spend. So you need to give equal consideration to how you're spending your money. And many of the earlier stage companies that I've seen now that are successful are in many ways a virtual company, meaning that, there's certain things that they have to do, the design and engineering, but they don't have to do the manufacturing. They may not have to do any of the infrastructure work. You may not need a CFO. You may be able to outsource that, for instance. So there's many ways that avoiding those long-term commitments, those big capital expenditures of bringing more people on or taking on some of the value chain of what you have to deliver yourself, outsourcing it to others is a good way to save capital. And remember, what you're looking for is not necessarily investment, but cash.
Yeah.
And so to the point before, you can sometimes get it from grants and awards, but you can sometimes get it from customers too. So if there's a way to get cash to fund your business, that's what you're looking for, more so than investments per se. And also, just all this issues on it, just be very careful about debt.
Exactly. That's actually a very strong point, and that's how we work at this point. So we had the time, the 2000s, when there was big cash available. Clean tech was booming. Investment companies said, listen, you could draw something up in a napkin with the right connections, and that would give you 30, 40 million euros to start a company. In the clean tech field, this has really, I think, has changed fundamentally in the last year. So at this point, to be frugal and to be super detailed about what you need to spend that money on and what is the easiest, most effective, cheapest, and less time-consuming way to get that money to do what you need to be doing, I think has become even more vital than it was 10 years ago. If you don't define clearly what you need and when you need it and why you need it, how much it's going to cost, it has gotten very difficult to just kind of get this big bucket of money and somebody say, just do with it whatever you want. How do you feel about that, Steve?
I agree. Look, I think you should raise less at first. I mean, nobody enjoys spending their time raising capital when you want to build a business. You should take what's reasonably offered to you, but things like debt that has become more common, at earlier stage companies, that can be very dangerous because it'll come with covenants, it'll come with maturity dates, and it very often is debt and the inability to manage a repayment or an accelerated maturity that causes the downfall of some companies. So, there are other times when someone says you can go public early on a very small market.
Yeah.
And that'll raise capital for you too. And then you get yourself in a situation, a public but orphaned company without the right type of public institutional investor holdings, without research coverage, without liquidity in your stock. It's very hard to break out of that too. I've seen many clean tech companies, whether it's in Canada or somewhere in Europe, go public on these smaller markets just as a way to raise capital now at the advice of an investment bank. It's very hard then to break out of that and become the kind of publicly traded company you want to be with a market cap in the hundreds of millions of euros or dollars, where people care about you. There's a lot of them, a lot of these micro cap clean tech companies out there, public, but just stuck in their low valuation, and they've been stuck there for years. And unless something really significant happens, some sort of breakthrough event, they're going to remain in that position where, they'll limp along and they'll raise cash, but they really won't ever achieve what they could have because the enthusiasm for the business, whether as a customer or as a potential employee or as investor, has been lost.
You just don't have the upside. And just from my personal experience, and we met again, Stephen, we talked about IPO, this kind of things. That's like running a second company, right? If you're a technology company and you think that prepares you for running an IPO process, an investment bank process, it really doesn't. It's a completely separate business. It will pretty much force you to step away from all the technical things you're doing. And you're becoming the CEO of a publicly traded company, which is simply in today's world is a massive effort. Stephen, what excites you technology-wise today? What's like the last thing where you say, listen, I have to be part of this thing. It's going to change the world. It's going to make a difference. I want to spend my time on this.
Well, that's a really interesting question. I'm working with quite a few companies, and many of them have solutions that I think are necessary and solve immediate problems, but not necessarily in and of themselves game changers. And I think all those companies deserve to have financial support, deserve to be successful. We need to figure out a way to have e-commerce without so much waste all the time, reusable packages. So I work with a company called Lime Loop. Work with a company that makes the industrial process, food processing, much more efficient by recovering waste heat. I mean, these are all good solutions, but I think the things to me that are game changing, one is carbon capture. I think we need to have a lot more investment in capturing carbon, whether we do it through natural systems or what I'm really talking about here, because we're talking about new companies, new technologies, is to do it technologically. And we have to capture that carbon both at the point of emission, and ultimately we'll probably get to the point where we do direct air capture too. We need to get those costs down. But the numbers just don't work. We don't avoid this climate crisis unless we're able to take carbon out of the atmosphere too. There's no amount of mitigation that's realistic that's going to get us there. Right? You're converting the grid to all solar and wind. That's a challenge in of itself. Then we have everything to deal with from industrial uses and transportation, light duty and heavy duty, food and agriculture. There's so many sources of carbon. We need to have really effective economical technologies on the other side that are capturing that carbon and then using it or storing it. The other thing that I think is interesting, one of the ones that I've been spending more time on, is just the opportunity to use our oceans better. One in particular, marine permaculture. There's just so much right now fight over land and how to use it, whether to use it to capture carbon, as I was mentioning, reforestation, but we need food and we need fuel. We need places for livestock. To get around all those land use issues would just take billions of different actions by people every single day. But the ocean provides a lot of opportunity, and there is a lot of carbon in the ocean right now, but it's on the surface of the ocean. If we could just distribute it more, there's enormous capacity in the ocean to capture that carbon and to produce the food, the feed, the fuel that we need without all of the land use issues that you have. We're trying to solve those same issues on land.
Amazing. I mean, and very valid point. We were in Indonesia, right? Stephen, you're always welcome. You just made a lot of new friends here. So if you want to come visit, I mean, I'd be very, very excited meeting you in person. We actually have a guest room right next to our studio.
Come to Bali.
I would love it if you guys could just turn the camera around for a second. I could see the audience there.
Can you use the... Oh, you see this one. Yeah, you don't see the whole studio because you're on this little...
I'm just seeing that's at the top of the screen. I don't even see you, Julian.
Oh, that's so boring. You should have said something.
Very good. That'll be better for Q&A too.
There we go. I'm just going to leave you right here.
Perfect.
I said, can you see somebody?
Yeah, I can see a few people.
Very good. Very good. Because I only have one more question, and then I'm going to leave you to the Q&A. If people want to work with you, right, and as I said, we're super happy you're spending your time in impact technology, impact investment. How can people reach out to you? What do you like to do? What are you looking for? What's the best way to get a Stephen Birkenfeld on your side?
Well, you could read. One of the good things about my name is there's only one of me out there, so I'm easy to find. There's also Stephen.Birkenfeld@gmail. But I am happy if you have a climate tech solution, if you have an interesting new way to solve a issue around decarbonization, right? Energy efficiency, it could be food and ag related, whatever it is. I'm happy to have a conversation with you. No more than that. I'm happy to look at your business plan and then talk about how you're presenting it and whether I think you're communicating the story well and what's missing. I see a lot of decks, for instance, that spend the first 6 or 8 pages just talking about the climate crisis. You don't need to do that anymore, because if the investor doesn't know that we have a big problem here that we need to solve as soon as possible, it's not the right investor for you. So focus in on what you're doing, what your sustainable competitive advantage is, how you're different, how you're disruptive, what your go-to-market strategy is, why you're going to be successful. But I'm happy to have those conversations. I'm doing this out of, sounds a little hokey, out of love, right? I want as many companies that are involved in impact and sustainability to be as successful as possible, right? This is my way of contributing to the fight on the climate crisis. I was chairman of the board for the Sierra Club. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. It's the largest environmental organization in the United States. But in many ways, I found that experience frustrating because they had a relatively narrow body of work. It was just the United States. It was just really around solar and wind for the electric grid and maybe electrification of some transportation. But as I mentioned before, there's many other things we need to solve. So I would say if someone would just like to talk about their business, I'm happy to do it. And if we see that there's a basis for working in a more formal way, working more closely, maybe I can introduce you to some investors. We can talk about it on that call and see how that progresses. But if they would just like to just kind of kick around their ideas, their business, what their plan is, again, I'm happy to do it as long as they're willing to, just accommodate the 12-hour time difference.
Excellent. As in super valuable. And said that we also have a chat function on our app. If any of you hasn't downloaded the app yet, you can actually communicate straight within the app. Stephen is there with his own bio, so he's the only Stephen Birkenfeld we have right now. Please don't all text him at once, but he has always been incredibly helpful. I said that before, and incredibly open and gets incredibly excited about new things, even though he's been doing this for a long time. I want to open up to questions. I got another tech CEO actually in my front row here. If you look a bit, he's the less attractive one of the two. His name is Renat Heuberger from a company called CEO of a company called South Pole, and he was actually speaking right before you. Renat, what's your question to Stephen. I don't think you guys met before.
Hi, Stephen. Good to meet you.
Good to meet you too.
I have a bit of a different question. I would like to understand what this commitment to climate action, has this been something that has accompanied you throughout your career? And if not, what was the game changer? What was the event or the serious event that made you embrace that topic?
Okay, well, first I'd like to tell you that I'm wearing shorts too. You guys just can't tell.
I'm the only one who put on pants for this. That's a very rare event.
Times and it's usually worded along the lines of how did an investment banker become an environmentalist? How did an investment banker become the chairman of the board of the Sierra Club Foundation? And I actually usually answer that question is backwards. It's how did an environmentalist become an investment banker? So I think I've always cared and always wanted to do this, and this is just something you have from your childhood experiences, a love of nature. You know, at the time it wasn't climate change, that was an issue, but it was clean air and clean water and protecting wildlife and endangered species. You know, I'm saying this as these photographs are behind me over my shoulder of the first trip we took to Africa. So it's just always been an interest and a passion. And I found myself as an investment banker. Maybe part of the answer is I started as a lawyer and then moved into investment banking, but I was always true to this. And one of the things I had the opportunity to do at Lehman and Barclays was, when I mentioned transaction approval, I managed reputation risk. And so I was always getting deep in the conversations around not just the good green business we should be doing more of that, but doing less of the bad. And that would sometimes be issues around weapon manufacturers or private prisons or subprime lendings, but largely it was around fossil fuels and moving away from coal and not financing, supporting thermal coal mining or project finance for a new thermal coal power plant or any development in the Arctic, things like that. So I've been lucky. I've been always an environmentalist. I think in my days at Lehman, I was too busy to be able to spend much time on it. But the change over to Barclays sort of freed up some time where I could start covering it on the banking side and also do more on the not-for-profit. So it was really just reaching a point in your life. There was someone who, I'm answering, going way too long in this answer, but someone who retired a while ago, who was a bit of a friend and mentor, who said on the occasion of his retirement from banking that you have 25 years to learn, 25 years to earn, and 25 years to return.
Oh, I like that.
And I was lucky enough to do some returning while I was earning. But now, you know, it feels great to move squarely in, even though my math is a little off, to move squarely into the return phase.
You were actually fast by those terms. Only talking about 41 years, right? In total. Good day, Kayla.
Great, thank you. Hi, Stephen. My name is Kayla. I'm the founder of an organization called Montaya, and we work specifically within the domain of supporting positive impact startups enter into more collaborative and cooperative relationships. And my curiosity to you is, one, how does it make a startup more appealing when you see that they have formed healthy collaborative relationship with other startups? And really, what is the role that you see of collaboration and cooperation in this particular moment in time within the clean tech industry?
Right. That's an interesting idea because I really haven't explored that yet, and I haven't seen much of it. I think there needs to be a lot more. There's a lot of value. You know what I always found interesting is I would deal with these earlier stage companies, and they always felt they needed to compete with each other around their technology, about having the better solution. So you'd meet a fuel cell company and they would disparage batteries, right? Electric vehicles for batteries on the transportation side. And the batteries one would say, oh, no, they'll never be fuel cells. And they'll kind of go back and forth, and some had hybrid models. but they all were very quick to tell me how they were better than the other alternative to fossil fuels. And I'd always have to remind them that they're not really competing with each other. They're competing with that big incumbent industry, right? Cars with oil. And that's where they should focus. If it's a big problem, there's going to need to be a lot of solutions from different companies. So I think collaboration, say, sometimes fuel cells make sense, sometimes batteries make sense, sometimes a hybrid makes sense on any of these sort of things. Sometimes solar is a better answer, sometimes it's wind, but sometimes maybe it's going to be hydrogen or whatever it might be. But I would love to see more collaboration. And I think ultimately, when they're talking to investors, when they're talking to customers, to compete with another emerging technology does not serve them well. To say I'm collaborating because I think my technology makes sense in these situations, but this other technology makes sense in other situations, and we work together. And when we see a problem, we figure out who's got the best solution. Maybe one day we'll merge together, but for now we'll collaborate. I think from a customer standpoint, from an investor standpoint, I think that can be very powerful. But there's a real lack of it. There's a real shortage. Everybody wants to be the winner in this disruptive space among the other disruptors, instead of saying what I really want to win is against that all that market share that the old way of doing things has.
Fantastic.
That's exactly the pain point we're targeting, and in conversation around partnering with Julian with this app. And I'm curious if you have any ideas that come up for you around pathways that really could be supporting the reduction of project redundancy.
Look, I think it's worth a deeper discussion. I'm happy to follow up on it. Love to just see your materials and kick around some ideas. Again, at first I've really thought about how you could get more collaboration, but seeing the companies and what they do and the limits on their solution, right? They don't need to have to solve every problem for every customer. If they just had the right collaborations and could hand things off or work jointly, first, they'd be probably more successful commercially, but we'd also get to decarbonization a lot faster.
That's one of the points I tried to make earlier, is that bringing a startup and technology to market is incredibly difficult. Right? It takes a long time, a lot of capital, a lot of resilience and everything else. And nobody, I deeply believe that nobody can go that way alone. Right? You need to have friends, you need to have partners, you need to have supporters within your own industry, outside your industry, outsource almost anything you might be able to outsource to a partner. Kayla is very good at getting people involved on working on sweat equity, for example, that believe in her work, which then on the return side puts you in a position where you might have to raise capital maybe 6 months later or a year later after you already have a working prototype, instead of having to start paying people from the very beginning. Do we have any other questions in the audience? Will in the back, also startup entrepreneur here in Bali.
Yes, I'm big, but I've got a question about something outside of my domain right now.
Well, could you get closer to the mic? I can't hear you.
Absolutely.
He's also very attractive. He's also allowed to move to the front row here.
Okay. I
know.
Hi, Stephen. My name's Will.
Hi.
And I've got an interest in seagrass farming. When the Amazon rainforest was burning down, I did some research after watching a David Attenborough documentary on the blue kingdom, the ocean. And seagrass has 35 times more absorbency for carbon dioxide than the same patch of rainforest. But with the research I did, I couldn't discover any technology or any pre-existing companies that were successful in that domain with a positive return on investment. So I'm interested to know if you've got any connections in that industry and are aware of any companies that are making a positive return.
So one of the companies I'm working with is called C Combinator, and they were just profiled in this film that came out of Australia called 2040. You could probably find it online. It's a nice film, very hopeful. Really, it's for an adult audience, but it would work really well for kids too. So if any of you have kids and want to watch something like this, I think they'll really enjoy it. And that spoke about marine permaculture. C Combinator starting by just collecting the sargassum that is washing up on shore in the Caribbean, make it so that you can't even go to these resorts, and you guys are all in Bali. But imagine if you had, 2 feet thick of seaweed washed up on the beach, where you had to kind of climb around it or over it to get into the ocean. It's creating a real issue on tourism, making for a really unpleasant experience. And that stuff is just rotting away. Sometimes it's collected and put in a landfill, generating methane. And they're starting by just collecting that and processing it and using it for feed and fuel. It can be used in pharmaceuticals and packaging. Seaweed, that's why I said I was excited about it. It could be one of the great solutions. But ultimately, what they'd like to do is to develop arrays in the deeper ocean to regrow kelp forests. And they can harvest the kelp, and then, to your point, that they're absorbing a lot of carbon from the ocean, from the atmosphere. They're changing how acidic it is. And then ultimately you can kind of release the kelp that's not harvested, the bottom of it, and that becomes long-term sequestration in the ocean down at lower levels, which should last for hundreds of years. So, that's one that I found in this area, and I do think it's game-changing technology. I think the challenge, and it's what's happening in the Amazon is a tragedy. It's shameful, but the problem is there's just so much competition for land.
Yeah.
And you see it in Indonesia, of course, how many rainforests are cut down to make a palm oil plantation. In Brazil, they're doing it for adult. It's tough. If we can use the oceans instead, I think there's tremendous amount of opportunity. I should also mention, by the way, besides being in shorts, I'm also barefoot.
You would fit in so well here.
I know I could. I'm gonna have to talk to my wife and family afterwards.
I can talk to them for you if you like, for somebody to sell Bali from the bottom of his heart. I want to end this right here unless we got any urgent question, because I'm super thankful, Stephen, for your time. I encourage people to reach out when they have questions. Now not every investment banker out there is me, right? There are actually some really, really, really cool people out there. And if through these talks and the keynotes, we come back to this point that in every industry, you can find somebody that is a believer, that is a change maker, that wants to see a better future for this planet. They're all out there. You can see them at every major investment bank, major corporations. You don't have to be afraid of them. There's some really, really cool, smart people. If you want to work with people like him, you have to deliver. I know that as well. It's a very low bullshit tolerance, and he wants you to get your work done. That's the New York thing after all, but it's important. And Stephen, I just want to really thank you for your time and your incredible work. Please, one round of applause. And join us very soon in Bali, and we leave you to your long day, and we're going to sing and have a drink. All right?
All right. Thank you very much. And everyone there, feel free to reach out. Right? I'm happy to talk to you. Happy to explore new ideas, new business plans. However I can help, I'd like to.
Amazing. Thank you so much. All the best. Come home in New York City and enjoy your day. Thank you, Stephen. Hi to your family.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you all so much for coming out. This was the first event in the EX Venture Pitch Night series. We didn't have any pitches tonight, but we'll have the first one on Thursday. So I want to German companies pitching for us. They're called Africa Green Tech, and they're doing incredibly hard work. They're bringing solar storage containers to Mali, some of the poorest parts of the world. They're raising funds right now, but they've already built 10 power plants or 15 or something at this point, so they have a proven track record. They have an incredibly charismatic, contrarian CEO that we're going to hear from. His name is Thorsten Schreiber. I am very proud to call him my personal friend. He also has a slightly more moderate CFO, I would think, at the size of Professor Wolfgang Rams, who teaches entrepreneurship and impact in Munich. And they're going to be talking about Africa Green Tech. It's actually an investment opportunity right now from the crowd to invest into these power systems that are literally taking villages off the diesel generator and truly empower communities to fully renewable energy around the clock. And we're going to hear from Juan Macias, also a personal friend of mine, who is also an incredibly likable person, but also a person who can get a lot done. He is number 2 at Schneider Electrics, the largest innovation parts. They do everything. You can see, even in Indonesia, you can see the Schneider Electric signs. I mean, you can get their switch cabinets from them. Very strong partner in my background, person we like to work with. So Juan Matias represents Schneider Electrics, a company that buys a lot of companies, invests a lot of companies, does a lot of super cool stuff, and again has a very charismatic leader with Jean-Pascal Tricoire, who is definitely as much of an environmentalist as anyone out here or that you'll meet. Really, really cool people. And he also represents now the joint venture of Schneider Electrics with Carlyle Fund. And that is super interesting because in 2015, Carlyle Fund with $260 billion under management is the world's largest private equity fund. That's not a pension fund or anything else. And so he now does projects together, joint venture, Carlyle Group and Schneider Electric. One of them you might have heard of, it's the new international terminal at JFK Airport. So if you really want to build something big, and I think we all agree we need big impact, big change, we need big money and big projects in order to make that happen, plus millions and billions of small changes. I totally agree with that one as well. But for the big stuff, Juan Macias is one of the people to talk to. And I'm super excited to have them with us on Thursday. And next Tuesday, we're going to have a women's round. We're going to have Susanne Hasner from Yara, one of the largest fertilizer companies in the world. From Norway, stock-listed company, they're absolutely global. She's going to be joining us from Singapore to talk about what they're doing in order to make agriculture more sustainable. And then we're going to hear from the head of venture at Renault, Mitsubishi, Nissan, is what this large conglomerate of international car companies is doing to drive a more sustainable, cleaner future. And I feel very, very privileged to be your host and lead these people through the program. And thank you very much for coming for a living room. Thank you for Oliver and Felix that are not trained broadcast engineers that put this whole thing together in my living room as per request. It's going to look amazing and it's going to keep getting better. And we're looking forward to the next episodes. Download the app, join us, join the website, put up your content, ask us questions, reach out. Let's work together to create more impact faster. My name is Julian. Thank you very much and have a great night.